I'm Connie. I'm sitting on the couch in Natalie's apartment, a small stack of pamphlets on the table beside me. The room is dim, illuminated only by the yellow glow of a single lamp. Outside, the city buzzes faintly, a distant hum that used to fill me with fear but now brings a strange sense of comfort. I take a deep breath, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I can breathe without the weight of terror pressing down on my chest. It all started on that fateful October night. I was living with my boyfriend, Jake. He was charming at first, but over time, his true nature began to show. He was a heavy drinker, and when he was drunk, he became a different person. Angry, violent, and unpredictable. That night, Jake came home drunk, as he often did. His eyes were bloodshot, and his breath reeked of alcohol. He started arguing with me, his voice rising with each word. I tried to reason with him, but it was no use. He was in a rage, and nothing I said could calm him down. Suddenly, he lunged at me, his hands closing around my throat. I felt something inside me snap, not a bone, not a sound, just the last thin thread of hope that he might stop someday. His drunken breathing was hot against my face as he hissed something I couldn't process. My vision blurred at the edges, and my fingers clawed weakly at his wrists. But then, instinct took over. I drove my knee forward with every ounce of strength I had left. It landed hard, and Jake groaned, his grip loosening for just a second. That was all I needed. I tore away from him, stumbling backward, gasping for air that burned my lungs. My throat pulsed with agony, but I didn't think. I didn't look back. I snatched my bag from the floor, grabbed my jacket without even putting my arms through the sleeves, and ran. Jake's voice exploded behind me as I bolted out the apartment door. "Connie, get back here." It was the same voice I had heard so many times, angry, slurred, full of the kind of rage that never cooled. The hallway spun as I sprinted down the stairs, my hands shaking so violently I almost slipped on the last step. I hit the lobby door with my shoulder and burst into the night. The cold October air slapped me across the face, but I barely felt it. My legs kept moving, driven by terror rather than direction. I ran across the street without looking. A passing car hit a puddle, drenching my jeans with icy water, but the shock didn't slow me. I could still hear Jake's voice in my head. I knew how he got when he was drunk enough. I knew what he was capable of. A traffic light flicked red in front of me, glowing dimly through the blur of my tears. I paused, my breath ragged, and dared to look over my shoulder. The door to our building stayed shut. No movement, no silhouette. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he had given up or gone back inside for another drink, but I knew better. Jake never let anything go. If he reached me again, if he got another chance, I wasn't sure I would survive it. The bus was already pulling up to the stop on the corner, old, dented, paint peeling from the sides. One of the late-night routes that only a handful of people used. The interior lights flickered as the driver leaned forward, clearly preparing to close the doors. "Wait!" My voice cracked as I sprinted toward it, waving frantically. The driver, a middle-aged man with gray at his temples, hesitated, then reopened the doors with a tired sigh. I climbed aboard, my chest heaving, my hands trembling so violently I almost dropped my bag. I muttered a breathless thank you and headed straight for the middle of the bus. Only when I sat down did the adrenaline begin to ebb, and with it came the pain. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, my hair clinging to my face, mascara streaked, cheeks wet, and the bruise on my left cheekbone already deepening into a black-purple blotch. My neck throbbed. When I touched it, I winced. Finger marks. I knew they would bloom darker overnight. For a moment, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, my breath fogging the surface. I tried to steady my breathing, to think, but all I could feel was the echo of his hands and the weight of fear pressing down on my chest. The bus rumbled through the quiet Providence streets, streetlights smearing into golden streaks through my tears. I barely noticed the footsteps approaching until someone sat down beside me. The bus was nearly empty, rows and rows of open seats, and yet an elderly woman chose the seat next to me. I stiffened, startled, but the woman didn't speak. She simply looked at me, really looked. Her eyes moved over the bruise on my cheek, the red marks along my throat, the trembling in my fingers. I swallowed hard, suddenly self-conscious, wanting to hide but too exhausted to move. The woman didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even introduce herself. When the bus slowed for the next stop, the woman stood, adjusted the strap of her worn handbag, and stepped toward the door. Then, just before she descended the steps, she turned her head and met my eyes with a quiet, devastating certainty. "He will kill you." The doors hissed shut before I could move, before I could ask who the woman was, how she knew, or why those 3 words felt less like a warning and more like a fact. The bus pulled away, leaving me frozen in my seat, my fingers white around my bag, my heart pounding in terrified clarity. I had escaped tonight, but the danger was far from over. The bus rumbled through the quiet streets of Providence, its engine humming steadily as the city blurred past the windows. But for me, everything inside felt unbearably still. The old woman's warning echoed in my ears, sharper than the cold metal of Jake's hands had been. I pressed my palms against my face, trying to stop the tears, but they broke through anyway, spilling hot across my cheeks. For a moment, I tried to convince myself I was safe simply because I was moving, because miles were slowly growing between me and the apartment. But safety wasn't a place I could get to, not anymore. The truth crept in slowly, then all at once. I had nowhere to go, no home that would take me in, no family close enough to reach before dawn, no friends who still knew me well enough to answer the door at this hour. My parents came to mind first. They lived in a small town in Maine, far beyond what I could travel now. Even if I called them, even if someone picked up, Jake had worked for years to distance me from them. "You don't need to visit," he would say. "They don't like me. They judge you. They fill your head with ideas." At first, I believed he was just insecure. Later, I understood it was control, but by then the calls home had become less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I wiped my eyes, trying to breathe. The bus jolted over a pothole, and I startled, instinctively pulling my jacket tighter around my body as though it could shield me from the memories crowding in. I forced myself to think of my friends, old coworkers, college roommates, neighbors I used to invite for coffee. I went through the names one by one, like checking a list I already knew would come up empty. Jake had chipped away at each relationship. With one friend, he claimed she was a bad influence. With another, he accused me of flirting too much. With a third, he started fights until I felt too embarrassed to see them again. People drifted away. I retreated further, and Jake filled the space, becoming my entire world, the center of it, and the walls around it. I closed my eyes, my heart squeezing painfully. How had I let myself become this isolated? How had I not seen what was happening? The bus slowed for a red light, and my gaze drifted to a row of storefronts passing by, places I had once visited, once enjoyed, once felt welcome in. I didn't even know if those people would remember me now. My life had shrunk so quietly, I barely noticed until there was nothing left of it. Nothing and no one except one name. Natalie. My breath caught. Natalie had been my closest friend for years. Someone I trusted completely. Someone who tried to warn me about Jake early on. And for that reason, Jake resented her. He called Natalie manipulative, jealous, toxic. He banned me from seeing her. The fights grew worse every time her name came up until I finally stopped mentioning her altogether. It had been a long time since we'd spoken, too long. But Natalie had been the one person who never judged me, never demanded anything, and always cared. And right now, she might be the only person left. The decision settled into my chest slowly, like an anchor dropping. I wiped my face with a sleeve of my jacket, took a shaky breath, and reached for the stop request cord. The bell chimed faintly above me. As the bus rolled into Federal Hill, the night felt even colder, the air heavier with uncertainty. I stepped down onto the sidewalk, my legs weak from the adrenaline crash, and the raw ache in my throat. The streetlights cast long shadows across the buildings, stretching toward me like reminders of all the ways the night could still go wrong. I hesitated. Maybe Natalie had moved. Maybe she wouldn't open the door. Maybe she'd forgotten me altogether. but I knew I couldn't turn back. I couldn't sit on another bus until morning. I couldn't wander the city, hoping fear would keep me warm. I walked toward Natalie's old apartment building, each step slow, exhausted, unsure, but determined enough to keep moving through the dark. Tonight, I had nowhere else to go. By the time I reached the worn brick apartment building on Atwells Avenue, my legs felt like they no longer belonged to me. I climbed the steps slowly, gripping the railing to steady myself. The hallway light flickered as I made my way to the third floor, each step sending a pulse of pain through my bruised throat. When I stopped in front of Natalie's door, my hands were shaking so violently I almost missed the doorbell. I pressed it again, weaker this time, praying Natalie still lived here, praying she would answer. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Then the lock clicked. The door cracked open just enough for a face to appear, tired, wary, hair pulled into a messy bun. Natalie was holding a mug and wearing an oversized sweatshirt, clearly not expecting visitors. But the moment her eyes landed on me, the mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the entryway floor. "Oh my God, Connie." I tried to speak, to smile, to explain, but the words never formed. My knees buckled and I pitched forward. Natalie lunged and caught me before I hit the floor. Hey, I've got you," Natalie whispered, pulling me close. I buried my face against her friend's shoulder and sobbed so hard my whole body shook. Natalie wrapped both arms around me, steady and sure, holding me as if she were trying to shield me from the entire world. "You're safe. You're here now. It's okay. I've got you." I clutched her friend's sweater, unable to stop crying. Everything I had been holding in, the fear, the shame, the panic, broke open all at once. I cried until my throat burned and my breath came in ragged, hitching waves. Natalie didn't rush me, didn't pull away. She just held me. When I could finally stand again without collapsing, Natalie guided me inside and closed the door behind us. The apartment was warm, softly lit, and smelled faintly of vanilla candles. It felt like stepping into another universe. "Sit," Natalie said firmly, pulling a blanket off the back of the couch and wrapping it around my shoulders. "I'm getting my first aid kit. Don't move." I nodded weakly. My face stung when I touched my cheek. The bruise had darkened, spreading like spilled ink beneath my skin. Natalie returned within seconds, dropping to her knees in front of me. She studied the injuries quietly, too quietly. Her gaze moved from the imprint of fingers on my neck to the swelling along my cheekbone. She didn't look shocked, just grave. "This wasn't a fall," Natalie said softly, pressing a cold pack against my cheek. I swallowed hard. "No." "Okay," Natalie murmured, her tone calm but threaded with something sharper, a focused urgency I didn't yet understand. "Tell me what happened." I tried to start, but my voice cracked. Natalie placed a steady hand against my arm. "Take your time." So I inhaled shakily and told her everything. How Jake came home drunk again, how his anger escalated without warning, how he grabbed my throat and pressed until the room tilted sideways. How I escaped, ran barefoot down the stairs, caught the bus at the last second, and then the old woman. When I reached that part, Natalie paused mid-movement. She said, "He will kill you." Just like that, I whispered, hugging the blanket closer. She didn't even know me. Natalie exhaled slowly, sitting back on her heels. Her eyes weren't wide with disbelief. They were steady, knowing. I frowned. "You're not surprised?" "No," Natalie said quietly. "I'm not." She rose and sat beside me on the couch, keeping her voice gentle but unwavering. "I work at a women's crisis center, remember? I see this kind of thing every week. The bruises, the isolation, the escalation, the near misses, and the warnings from neighbors, nurses, even strangers on the bus. People notice patterns victims don't always see." I stared at her, stunned. "You really think he would have?" "Connie," Natalie's voice didn't rise, but it didn't soften either. "From what you just told me, he already tried." The words struck like a physical blow. My breath hitched, fear rising again, but Natalie reached out and took my hand, grounding me. "You did the right thing coming here," she said. "You're not alone tonight, and you are not going back to him. Not now, not ever. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't panic. It was relief, so overwhelming I almost sobbed again. For the first time all night, I felt like I wasn't drowning. Natalie squeezed my hand. We're going to figure this out together. Natalie didn't turn on the overhead lights. She kept the apartment dim and warm, as if instinctively knowing that anything too bright or sudden might make me recoil. She guided me back to the couch, placed a soft blanket around my shoulders again, and sat beside me. You need to understand something, Natalie began gently, but her tone carried the steady clarity of someone who had said these words to frightened women many times before. What happened to you tonight? It's part of a pattern. It doesn't start with strangling. It escalates to it. I stared at the bruises on my own hands, my voice barely audible. The woman on the bus. How did she know? Natalie rested her elbows on her knees and clasped her hands together, thinking for a moment before answering. Because the signs are visible, especially to women who've lived through it or worked with survivors. In the U.S., strangulation is one of the biggest red flags in domestic violence cases. It's a predictor of future homicide. Most older women know that, either from experience or from watching people around them. My stomach twisted. I hadn't wanted to hear the word homicide, not spoken so plainly, not connected to me. But Natalie didn't flinch. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was grounding me in reality. That woman didn't need to know your name, Natalie continued softly. She saw your neck, your face, your shaking hands, and she knew. I drew the blanket closer, the weight of the truth pressing down on my chest. I had spent years convincing myself Jake wasn't one of those men. And yet here I was, with bruises that told their own story. Natalie stood. You're staying here tonight. No arguments. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. Natalie cut in firmly. You're safe here. That's what matters. She disappeared into the hallway and returned with bedding, fresh sheets, a thick comforter, and a pillow that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. She set everything up on the living room couch with calm, practiced movements, as if she had done this 100 times for other women who fled in the dead of night. I tried to help, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Natalie gently lowered me back down. I've got it. Once the couch was made, Natalie brewed chamomile tea and placed the warm mug between my palms. The heat soothed my shaking a little, but not enough. Every distant car horn made me jump. Every sound from the hallway made my heart race. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt too sharp, too sudden. Natalie sat across from me, legs folded, watching me with steady compassion. Listen to me, she said quietly. Tomorrow morning we're going to the ER. They'll document every bruise and injury, photos, notes, everything. It's important evidence. I swallowed. Do I have to? Yes, Natalie said, not harshly, but with unwavering certainty. Hospitals in Rhode Island know how to handle domestic assault cases. They'll give you discharge papers with medical statements, and after that we go to the police. A fresh wave of fear washed over me. Jake will be furious. Natalie leaned forward. I know. That's why we're also filing for a restraining order. The hospital documentation helps with that, too. And the sooner it's on file, the sooner the police can intervene if he tries to come near you again. I stared down at my tea, watching the steam fade. The words restraining order felt foreign, heavy. I never imagined my life would come to this. Medical records, police reports, legal protection. But Natalie spoke with such calm authority that some small part of me believed it might actually work. I'll go with you to every step, Natalie added. You're not doing any of this alone. My eyes stung again. Thank you. Natalie smiled sadly. There's nothing to thank me for. I care about you. And you're alive tonight because you listened to your instincts.